Good afternoon. My name is Donna Cooper. I'm the Executive Director of Public Citizens for Children and Youth. If you're watching us on Facebook Live, welcome. This event is also on Zoom and it's being recorded. So we would, if you find it interesting, which we hope you will, you can download it and share it with your organization, your church, your civic organization, your neighborhood association, so that people in your community can understand what's happening in Montgomery County as it relates to the hidden cost of COVID-19 potential cuts and costs for public education in the county. We're so pleased that you're with us here today. Montgomery County is an extraordinarily wonderful place to live. So many families have such a terrific quality of life, and they can rely on an array of really, really wonderful school districts with dedicated school leaders, and we have many of them with us here today. The reason we want to have this conversation with the residents of Montgomery County is that there are very, very scary and deep cuts that could be affecting public schools coming down the pike in the next few weeks, dramatically affecting next year's school. And we want to make sure you know about it so you can be involved in talking with your federal lawmakers, your state lawmakers, your local school board members, and letting them know how important it is that we do everything necessary to avoid cutting the quality of education in Montgomery County. And so that's our purpose here today. Public Citizens for Children and Youth has been having these conversations across the region in Bucks County, Montgomery County, Delaware County, Philadelphia County, and we look forward to also having this conversation in Chester County, because we have a common cause in this region, which is we have stable and growing school districts, many of which are struggling to stay above water in terms of the resources that they need, but we are the economic engine of this state. Make no mistake, southeastern Pennsylvania generates the resources that make Pennsylvania a vibrant economy where employers want to locate. And we know that the quality of education is so important to their decisions to stay here, to grow here, and to come here. And one of the key places that businesses want to be is in Montgomery County, where we're all talking about today. So we're going to be together for about an hour. And what we'd like to do is have you hear directly from people who are in the school districts. 2 superintendents will be with us today and a school board member. So you get a sense of what they're seeing coming down the pike, what are the decisions they're going to have to make, and how are they going to have to make them. We want to talk with somebody who's working hard to keep the economy vibrant from the Pottstown Economic Development Organization and Industrial Development Organization. And we also want to talk with a local philanthropy about how schools fit into the ecosystem and how setbacks in the schools can really affect the ecosystem across the county. So, and we, of course, are honored today that your great county commissioner, one of 3, Ken Lawrence, is with us. And Ken is, as we all know, if you're in the county and you follow him on Facebook, got COVID or at least had to quarantine. Many of you might have watched him have his first beer at a local brewery over the weekend. So we're so glad that Ken is allowed out again. And so we'll be talking with him later on. We want to kick this off today with Superintendent Dormer. And Superintendent Dormer is from the Norristown School District. So one of the biggest school districts in the county, a very tough job. It's a school district that has extremely stressed resources, lots of families that have looked to the school district for meeting a lot of their needs. And so we're just so pleased that Superintendent Dormer's here to kick off this conversation. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Donna, and I want to say good afternoon to all of our panelists and all of during this this pandemic that we're trying to navigate right now. Not sure if people are aware that probably some of the most underfunded school districts in all of Pennsylvania reside in Montgomery County. I think PCCY has put out information. I believe the overwhelming majority of school districts in Montgomery County actually are underfunded when you look at the bipartisanly approved funding formula. But certainly, Norristown and Pottstown lead the way. in two regards: that we are underfunded by in excess of $10 million annually, and we have the highest local tax burden in our local communities. So, kind of a double whammy there. Just to reiterate to our audience and educate a little bit, Pennsylvania as a state only contributes 33% of our educational funding, and that ranks in the bottom 5 nationally. Now, that's a state average, but when you look at the Norristown Area School District, we only receive 24% of our funding from the Commonwealth. 72% of our revenues come from local sources. And when you look at that situation, and when you date back to the last recession, going back to 2008, low state funding has caused Norristown to commit what I like to call the 3 cardinal sins of school budgeting. And those being being forced to raise property taxes at or above our index, having to use fund balance or a rainy day fund to cover revenue shortfalls, and having to cut staff or programs. And prior to COVID-19, this budget year for the 2020-21 school year was going to be just the second time in 12 years that we were going to avoid doing all 3 of those, while bringing year 3 of our 5-year tech plan into being. And again, as a little bit of an economically challenged school district that is not currently a one-to-one, where we can't snap our fingers and have all of our children with devices, we were in a 5-year plan to get our high school at 1-to-1, our middle school to 1-to-1, and our elementary to have 2 devices for every 3 students. And again, it was going to take us 5 years to get there. And then COVID happened, and the digital divide was exacerbated, and we quickly realized that a lot of our families were without personal devices to use for distance learning. We also recognized a lot of our families struggle with having reliable home internet access. So, what did it force us to do, and where were those stressors under COVID? Well, we had to develop a continuity of education plan to do distance learning with our families. We had to accelerate a tremendous amount of district funds to try to purchase things that we did not budget for, whether that be paper copies or whether that be additional Chromebooks. We gave out every device we had. We spent district dollars to purchase an additional 1,300 Chromebooks. And where did that get us? That got us to a level where there was 1 device in every household, not 1 per child, 1 per household. And we desperately had families that were emailing us, and I still have one father emailing me all the time. When do you think you're going to get more devices in? Because I have 3 children trying to share 1 Chromebook across a school day. When COVID happened, our already stressed resources, we're projecting this year, this fiscal year alone, in just the 4th quarter, we're going to lose $2.6 million in local revenue. Next year, we're projecting a 5% decrease in local revenue. That we went from, again, having a really good, stable fiscal plan for next year. Just on the local side, now we have a $6 million problem in our 2020-2021 budget. And I know the federal government, passed the CARES Act. The money that we're targeted to receive doesn't even cover this year's shortfall, let alone looking ahead where, what PA could do. And we simply can't afford them to supplant our funding like they did in 2008-9 with the ARA stimulus funds back then. But meanwhile, we've been committed to serve. We've been committed to make sure that we're reaching all students, whether that be with education and with meals. And I think probably some of our proudest achievement in the little over 8 to 10 weeks we've been closed, Norristown Area School District has ensured food stability for our families. We've given out over 400,000 meals in that time. We've done that with less reimbursement per meal under the National School Lunch Program, but we know it's the right thing to do, and we're going to continue to do so. Our challenges going forward, we know that student needs are going to continue to increase. Distance learning is not the best mode of learning, and we recognize we're going to have to take care of that if and when our students come back in the fall. We also recognize there's a lot of unknown costs to reopening schools in the fall, obtaining personal protective equipment, cleaning costs. Are we going to have to install protective barriers? Are we going to need additional buses because of social distancing? Are we going to need additional staff for supervision? Those are all unknowns for us. And we understand fully that the state of Pennsylvania is anticipating revenues may be off by as much as $5 billion. But I'm here very simply to say that schools do so much more than just, the delivery of learning, as we've talked about. We are social services. We're continuing to have guidance. We're continuing to provide so much for our families, including meal service. And the right thing to do is to make sure that our education funding stays in place for us so that we can continue to serve and be that integral cog for our communities.
Well, thank you very much, Superintendent Dormer. And I actually want to ask you a question because I think you started out your career in Lower Merion.
I did.
Yes. And, one of the things that people who are listening today may not realize is not only does Pennsylvania rank very low, near the bottom, 47th, for the amount of effort it makes on behalf of public education at a per student level compared to all the other states, we also have the most disparate school funding system in the country. And you were at Lower Merion, and now you're at Norristown. And obviously in Lower Merion, they will also have to make tough decisions right now. But the tough decisions that you'll have to make in Norristown, should we be in a situation where the cuts are not eliminated, what would they look like? What are the kinds of things that are on the table that would never even be considered in Lower Merion?
Donna, we're being forced to consider things that you would hope you'd never have to consider. I mentioned earlier in my comments, we went about a 10-year period where every single year we were reducing staff, we were reducing programs. And when you have a stronger local tax base, those are things you don't necessarily have to consider. We've spent the past, period of years since I've been in Norristown just trying to repair our fund balance. And I'm thankful that we have that, but should state funding be cut? Like you said, we know we're going to have a $6 million problem in just local revenues next year. Should the state enact any kind of cuts next year, our fund balance is a point where literally within a year or two, our savings could be wiped out. And at that point, then we're faced with further reductions in staff, or further curtailments of program. And what does that mean for children? It means less opportunities. It means, just less things to explore the widest breadth of educational experiences possible. And, as a public school, I feel that's what we owe our families, to really educate the whole child, to go beyond just, the reading, writing, and arithmetic, because we don't know who that next generation of artist is going to be, or the next musician, or the next whatever. And to me, it is about making sure children are ready for whatever they want to do in life, whatever pathway that is. And to me, that's opening as many doors for them as possible. And the less funding we have, the less doors we have available for them to walk through.
That doesn't sound good. Thank you so much, Superintendent Dormer. It's so great to hear first person from, somebody really in the trenches right now trying to figure this out. And Laura, I have to adjust the program for a second because I know that Superintendent Gallagher has a 4:40 meeting that he has to make. So I want to make sure we hear from him. Now, we're going to go to the other side of the county, Souderton. It doesn't look at all like Norristown. It's a very different place. They have a terrific superintendent. Frank Gallagher has been a terrific leader, being a champion to improve the quality of education in every way, whether it's about resources or reasonable charter policy, you name it. Superintendent Gallagher has really been a leader talking about education issues in Pennsylvania. So we're so pleased to hear from him today. Tell us what it's like in Souderton right now and what it will mean if the state does not give you the tools you need or the resources that you need to keep things in shape.
Thank you, Donna. We are up in the country of Montgomery County. We're proud of that. And I actually started my career in Norristown a very long time ago. Norristown always has a place in my heart because that's where I began. Anyway, I do have, I think, some positive news that's kind of late breaking. We did get some word today that the legislature is ready to approve a budget that keeps our funding at the 1920 school year level, which, we would have loved to see the increase that was presented in the budget, but at least we know that it doesn't look like we'll get a decrease, which is helpful. But having said that, in Souderton, we are a unique community. I'll use Route 113 as sort of the dividing line of what you go down 113, you start in Harleysville, skip back area, and you head all the way over to Bucks County. And they're very different communities along the way. I have a challenge trying to meet the needs of our EL learners. I have I think probably the most meat packing industries in southeastern PA within my geographic area, and that is their employer. So we have a lot of different challenges up in Souderton, but very similar challenges as well. I have to say that I'm really proud of what we've been able to accomplish in the last 13 weeks. We've had devices for secondary. We tried to get devices into some elementary kids, but we didn't have enough. And we're doing our best to plan for next year. And next year is going to be very different. And we are planning for an online academy as well as in school. My goal is to open school as normal as possible with the precautions that make sense for schools. That's been a challenge for us, is the conflicting guidance that we get from the different levels of government. But that's our goal, is to open school to the best of our ability and with the precautions that are necessary to keep our children safe. Having said that, funding schools in Pennsylvania has always been a topic of discussion, is particularly in southeastern PA. I think Chris alluded to this, that we pay the most in property tax, the most in sales tax, the most in earned income tax, and we get the least from Harrisburg. There are districts on the western part of the state that get 80% of their funding from Harrisburg. So they don't really, it doesn't matter to them. And this is hard because opening school is going to cost a whole lot more money in a COVID environment than if we're just going back in a normal environment. The other thing is, I think I hear from my colleagues, superintendent colleagues, every Tuesday and Thursday we meet to plan, to discuss. And I think, as you would not be surprised, Montgomery County has led the way in providing, as fast as we can, quality online education. And I know we can even do better, and we plan to do better. And this is our opportunity to get back some of our cyber charter school students. And really, the real legislative push has to be cyber charter reform and special education formula charter reform. I lead with a social justice lens. That's what my doctorate was in. That's how I lead my organization. And I also lead making sure we're meeting the needs of the whole child. As best as we could do online learning in Montgomery County, it's not meeting the needs of the whole child, and online learning will never meet the needs of the whole child. And I will go to the bank with that statement. So really the legislative push after this budget is approved is cyber charter reform. There's no way I am sending, for every learning support kid or speech and language kid, autistic kid, I'm sending them right now $34,000 to educate that child. I'm sending about $14,000 to educate a regular ed child. We do it for much less than that. That formula needs to be changed so we can, this is really what would save our budgets and prepare us for the future. And as you know, Donna, I've created my own advocacy group. Chris is one of the founding members of the group as well, called Learn. We have the word out there. We held a press conference at Whitehall Elementary in Norristown back in February before this all began. And we are back up and stronger than we were before COVID, I think. So we are advocating. We need our parents and our community members to understand how your property taxes are being spent on cyber education, and something has to give. But
well, let me ask you a question about that, Superintendent Gallagher. You broke the news that the state legislature is going to pass a budget tomorrow, and they're going to level fund the schools. So that means that people may not have less money next year from the state than they had this year. But your costs are going up regardless. And you're going to hit some reduction in property taxes as well. So how does that look in Souderton in terms of what kind of costs are going up? Maybe it's the cyber, maybe it's special ed, pensions. And what are you seeing in terms of local tax collections?
Very much like Chris, our budget situation has really turned around up until now. In fact, I think Chris and I have talked about this before, is we were able to build up our fund balance to a reasonable level. I don't have the industry to support. I'm pretty much a bedroom community. There's some industry, but not a whole lot. And so it's my property taxes are really on the backs of the homeowner. So that's always been a challenge for Souderton, to try to respect that and understand that. But right now, we're looking at a $5 million deficit if we do a 0%. And If we do a 2.6%, which is the current approved budget, which will change probably because that's the preliminary budget, I still have to dip into my fund balance by $3-4 million. And I worry about that because year after year, you start doing that, you're never going to make up that funding. And then eventually it's going to lead to budget cuts, which are, we've been there with Souderton before with budget cuts. It's not pretty. And I don't think our children and families and community deserve that. Again, I don't want to see that happen again. So we're doing everything we can to mitigate it, but we really do need help, not just from the state government, but also the federal government. We received $365,000 through the CARES Act. That's a drop in the bucket to support what we need to do moving forward to provide quality education in a safe.
Right, because as Superintendent Dormer said, you don't know what your buses are going to look like in terms of social distancing. You don't know what your costs are going to have to be in terms of managing your school in terms of social distancing. And already you have kids who have lost learning, even though you've all done a great job on remote learning. There's a lot to do, especially to help the kids who have the hardest time. So I really appreciate your social justice lens and bringing up the cyber costs for people who are viewing this. You may not know that school districts are how cyber charter tuitions get paid. So as a kid leaves a school district or a homeschool kid goes to a cyber charter, then their host school district where they live has to pay them. And they're set at a very high rate, but actually Superintendent Dormer pays a different rate than Superintendent Gallagher, because it's based on their school district rate, for the exact same education. And as Superintendent Gallagher said, the school district can do it more effectively, and they can also do it more economically. And so one way to mitigate what's happening to school districts in terms of loss of revenue and curing deficits would be a better state law in that regard. I want to thank you so much. And, you know, I'm interested and would love to talk with you about how in Norristown and in Souderton, you know, how internet access has been available or not. I'm sure they've been issues, but I think we could have a long county conversations about that. And maybe Commissioner Lawrence will take the charge of making sure there's no one in the county that doesn't have internet access after this. But I want to jump to Laura Johnson. She's one of those amazing mothers who has decided that I need to be on my school board. I need to make a contribution to my community. She's here from another part of the county today, Pottstown. And this is a school district that, much like Norristown and the experience that they have in Souderton, highly underfunded compared to school districts in other parts of the state. And Laura, we'd love for you to tell us, this is Laura Johnson from the Pottstown School Board, tell us a little bit about what you're hearing in terms of school board members and what you think you might be anticipating in terms of, you know, deficits or revenue shortfalls.
Okay. Yeah, so as a Pottstown school board member, I can definitely confirm that even before the pandemic, balancing our budget every year has been a tremendous difficult thing. It just seems like there's always underfunded mandates, and there's always inequitable funding. For us, we're 13 million underfunded a year, which is about 4,000 per student every year. So it's just been an ongoing challenge. And I'm new to the school board, but just as I've paid attention and been an advocate, it's the constant story in our district, even before this happened. So when this happened, we had a lot of the same challenges as Norristown in terms of getting devices to our students. We're at this point, we're still nowhere near one-to-one, but at least trying to ensure that every household has some device they can use and has internet access. So here we are now. We've had this pandemic and the economic crisis that's coming after it, and things are obviously looking like they're about to get a lot worse for us. Obviously, school districts rely on both local and state revenue in order to run our programs, give our students the resources that they need. So this year, school districts in Montgomery County will be facing unprecedented shortfalls in the local revenues. We're projected to lose between $87 million and $102 million for the 2020-2021 school year. And that's just the local revenue. And the federal stimulus is helpful, but it only is anticipated to fill in about half of that gap for next year. Yeah, there's probably a couple ways to look at, but beyond the local losses, the state's facing a huge shortfall, which means that we're then at risk for cuts in state education dollars. And so, you know, that would be coming at us from both directions. And then on top of all of that, there are people in Harrisburg who think that the best way to deal with the economic challenges that we're facing would be to then tell school districts that they can't raise property taxes, which I know nobody likes raising property taxes. That's never something anybody wants to do. But taking away our ability to, taking that local control and that ability to raise revenue while keeping all of the unfunded mandates and even all of the new costs that are coming because of this pandemic, it just puts us in an impossible situation. Educating our kids and being able to give them what they need isn't just about right now, it's about the future of our communities. It's about stability. It's about our community's ability to thrive. So we've got to be able to bring the kids back to school in a safe environment where they can get a quality education. And school districts all across the county are working feverishly at this point to try to figure out how we're going to do that in the fall and to do everything that we need in order to make that happen. But the state has to fund us. They have to give us what we need in order to bring our kids back and give them what they need.
Well, thank you so much, Laura. And it's so great to know that there's somebody with your kind of passion on a school board in Pottstown, where there's so many kids coming from low-income families, and the hope of their economic future really rests on the doors that get opened by their school districts, right? It's kind of what Superintendent Dormer said. You open the doors, and you have the artists, you have the engineers of the future. And our entire county, Montgomery County, really depends on the schools to produce those open doors for kids. And so I just want to point out that what Laura said is that, you know, the school districts across the region in Monco specifically are looking as much as $100 million in local revenue losses. And that's because the economy has slowed down, and school districts get so much of their money from their local taxpayers that when the economy slows down per people, if you're in Monco, you pay earned income tax in some school districts. Mm-hmm. When houses are up for sale, people pay real estate transfer tax. When people are late on their property taxes because they're broke, all of that ends up on a burden on the school districts. And so, you know, people like Frank Gallagher and Chris Dormer have to find, and Laura have to find a cure for that. And sadly, if the state legislature removes their cure, one of the proposals that's being proposed, one of the items being proposed is capping property taxes at the current level. So that means that that $100 million, the only way the school districts have a way to cure that is to go into something called fund balance, which we're going to explain, or to make cuts. So just like your household has savings in the bank, school districts have some savings in the bank called fund balance. Across the state, school districts have about 10 to 15 days of fund balance a year in the bank. It's not a ton of money, but it's the money you need when the roof caves in. It's the money you need when there's an unexpected lawsuit. It's the money you need when you have an extremely complicated child with special education that could cost your school district $200,000 a year to educate. So school districts have typically across the state $10 to $13 of savings a year in the bank. And what Superintendent Gallagher and Superintendent Dormer were saying is, if we can't solve this revenue shortfall by small increases in property taxes, we have to eat into that fund that's available to us. Is that right, superintendents? Yeah, and so you have no money to deal with an emergency. So then when the emergency happens and the roof falls in, all the teams get eliminated because it's the only way you can pay to fix the roof. And so, you know, school districts do their best to be really well managed and really make sure that they're good stewards of tax dollars. And we all are in this together. This isn't something where the state is turning their back on school districts. We want to say, when people say they want to freeze property taxes, they want to do that because they know people are hurting. Mm-hmm. And we understand that. There is record unemployment, you know, and Montgomery County has been hit hard by unemployment. And I'm sure Commissioner Lawrence will talk about that. So we aren't suggesting that the cure here is a property tax increase. We're suggesting there must be a cure here, or the reverberations in Montgomery County will get scarier as the days go on in terms of doors shutting instead of opening for our students. So Peggy Lee-Clark is with us, and Peggy is from the Pottstown Industrial Development Authority, and Peggy used to be with the community college. So what a great experience to bring together the education infrastructure and the industrial development infrastructure. And, you know, I'm sure these issues are pretty top of mind for you right now. Love to know what you think about this situation.
Thank you, Donna. Good afternoon, everybody. So to rewind, and yes, I was with Montgomery County Community College for 21 years. I'm a proud alum of the community college, and that is about creating access to education. That is what community college is all about. And just a comment that one of the superintendents made about meeting students where they are. I can tell you that as a former faculty member that taught many, many classes and subject matter online, I often said online is not teaching, it is facilitating. So there are people that are able to be self-motivated learners and able to flourish in that environment and really get something out of it, but it is not for everyone. And a lot of times when I was teaching online, I felt like I wasn't spending time on the subject matter, but I was working on the technical aspects of the course, just making the availability of course curriculum to people and getting them to understand it. And sometimes they were so frustrated by the technology that they weren't really concentrating on the education.
Well, I will say, Peggy, I think there's very few parents that would agree right now we should move to online instruction, right? They're like, can I send my kids back to school? So
Right.
Thank you for raising that point, yes.
So that is one thing. So I'm obviously passionate about education, and I do understand the intersection of workforce as well as education, right? So what I want to say about it is that what I have watched in 21 years of community college and then now in this role at Pottstown is that it doesn't get any better, right? It just compounds. So the lack of investment in education, we are a very instant society. We like that instant gratification. Education is investment for the long haul, and that's just the fact. But if we don't continue to invest at appropriate levels, it is very scary about what the future of the outcome is. In the future. So we really need to make sure that we do make that investment. And I think it's more important than ever. When I work with the business community, one of the things that I hear about the workforce is, well, schools just aren't teaching what they need to teach. They're too old-fashioned. They're not agile. Well, they are agile, but agility takes money. To change curriculum and to change programming and to change facilities, that takes money. It's like when you revamp your operations, so many of our companies have pivoted during COVID-19 to offer a different product or manufacturing process. That still takes money. You don't just walk in and say, today I'm going to make widgets and tomorrow I'm making buttons, right? So I think that's a really important piece to education funding. The other thing that, going back to that online, what is the thing that we hear constantly from the business community? Oh, my employees, I can train them to work in my environment, but they don't have soft skills. Well, the way you get soft skills and the way that you work is to interact with other people. And that's what students get from a classroom that is a diverse classroom that can have that experiential learning going on that really you acquire. Soft skills always kind of befuddle me because nobody can really define what they really mean by those soft skills, but we all know that we want it, right? We want a productive employee that can teamwork and be a critical thinker and be somebody that can work with others. So that's the other thing, that all of funding needs to remain flexible. And what's coming next in education? That's the other thing. I think that for the business community, there will be a lot of innovation that comes from this pandemic. And that workforce is going to have to be innovative. And so, again, that takes money to involve students ready, whether they're coming out of high school and going straight to work, or whether they're going on to further educational opportunities. They're going to need that good basis, and it has to be the same, right? It has to be that equitable education, because then you just get further in a deficit for not only the school districts, but for the individuals coming out of those school districts. So it's so important. All of this is so important. I am so honored to be with all of these educational colleagues that are fighting the fight every day, because I believe that the only way out of poverty is through education. And it is my passion. Although I am passionate about Pottstown, I also see the challenges here in Pottstown. Pottstown is unique because it is like its own island. The municipal government and the school district are set right on top of each other. So the money comes all from the same pool. And so that is even a greater challenge.
Yeah.
So we have got to get equitable funding.
Well, and that speaks so much. I think you made some incredible points there, and I'm so inspired that you're the head of the Industrial Development Authority with that kind of passion. But, you know, parents raise children, but so do our schools. I mean, that's sort of, as you point out, the social skills, they learn to be flexible, innovation can be tested out on them, but they are children and they need to be raised. But the other thing that you point out is that, you know, for instance, in Norristown, the school district and the boundaries are the same. Pottstown, the school district and the community boundaries are the same. And so going back to the same local well for resources really makes it very difficult to support job growth, because it's a double hit on employers that are there in their communities. And it speaks to needing to do a better job on how we, in general, fund our schools. But I'm really so pleased that you're there, and it really speaks to the caliber of leaders in Montgomery County. I want to turn to Russ Johnson. You know, Russ has taken over the HealthSpark Foundation. You know, I shouldn't say taken over. He's been there now for a long time. But when he took over the HealthSpark Foundation, he really said, you know, we need to find a way to not just give out grants that will support people who are struggling, but we need to rebuild the ecosystem in Montgomery County so that families can be more effectively and innovatively connected to services so that they can thrive. And the work to build a viable safety net and to see the safety net as part of economic mobility is a narrative that Russ has succeeded, I think, in getting everybody to sing about in Montgomery County. And in those conversations, PCCY has been in those conversations, and I know you all have too. What I observe is the potential of extraordinary synergy and impact by bringing the school districts together with the safety net system. And so when we asked Russ if he would be part of this forum today, he immediately sent a list of ways in which the interconnectedness between the safety net services and the schools are more nuanced than I had even thought of. And Russ, I'd love for you to share those comments. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Donna, for inviting me to be here, and thanks for your kind comments as well. And just to level set, I'm a product of the public school system in Montgomery County. I'm a Cheltenham graduate, and I live in the Wissahickon School District. As Superintendent Dormer said, schools do so much more than just education, and I think that is absolutely spot on. Schools are considered in our community to be a safe place. They are the first place many families go for help and information about what we all now know are safety net services. I think until COVID-19 hit, safety net services were not well understood by many people in this community. But I think after COVID, it's going to be a rare person who does not understand the safety net. And the fact that the schools have been closed down and are not accessible to many in the community is a real challenge to the safety net. And yet, even in their closed down status, we're finding the schools are still there. So I'll talk about that in a second. But as I said, they are a safe place. They are where people go. They get information about how to help their families grow strong and be productive in the community, and whether that's supplemental nutrition assistance benefits, the SNAP benefits, or whether that's getting Medicaid or health services, or figuring out transportation challenges so folks can get to work. Oftentimes those conversations start in the school. Some student is struggling, and some caring teacher or guidance counselor or principal, maybe a superintendent every once in a while, we'll let you in. But those are the folks who first see what's happening and connect people. Aside from the essential public education services, schools also offer direct services. So here's a place where, even though they're all closed right now, you can go around this county and find schools dispensing food. Families that have eligibility for the reduced lunch program, breakfast program, eligibility through SNAP program, are finding their way into schools, doing drive-bys, coordinated pickups, box lunches, whatever. They're being distributed in many, many schools across the county right now. For students who've experienced trauma through homelessness or violence or abuse, schools once again are there as a source of referrals, counseling, access to supportive services. Schools also serve as a surveillance to the ongoing condition of students who are struggling with these experiences, and oftentimes are mandated reporters for child abuse. And that creates another form of safety for some of our most vulnerable kids in our county. As we've heard this afternoon, schools are distributing computer tablets to students to create an opportunity for them and the students and their families to access essential services and to learn. That would be great if everybody had universal access to the internet, but we're learning that that doesn't work, and sharing in families is another experience. One tablet, multiple students, as we have also heard. But it's a time when schools have stepped in to help fill that void, and somebody had to do it, and it was the schools who really made that happen for so many needy families. I would also suggest for students with special needs, and we heard this earlier today, schools also provide a myriad of supports and life skills, not just to the students, but to their caregiver families as well. They connect everybody. Schools, sometimes, you're stuck with this difficult decision about, so-called extracurricular activities, but I would suggest that that's character building, as Peggy was talking about a little while ago. It's the soft skills. It's the way in which people learn how to interact with one another. So whether they're participating in a sports team, or they're in a theater group, or they're part of a student association or whatever, schools create all the opportunity for those things to happen. I would also suggest one last thing, and that is that we have a number of students who are coming into Montgomery County year after year. Our population of new immigrants and new families is growing exponentially. In the largest school district in our county, I'm told there are more than 75 languages spoken in their high school, the North Penn High School. And so schools are providing a place for English as a second language, literacy programs for both their students as well as the families that support these students in the community. This is a runway for people to get engaged in our community. And so I think it's very, very short-sighted to just think about schools as a place where kids go for a few hours a day, for 5 days a week, for 9 months a year. I think they are year-round resources for our community. There are places like where I live right now, they're part of a walking trail community that our county commissioners have been constructing over the years. So it's a wellness example as well. So again, I would just close by saying schools do a lot more than education.
Well, Russ, it's really wonderful to hear you and Peggy, because I think often people like Laura and Superintendent Dormer and Superintendent Gallagher, we spend a lot of time wondering if anybody notices the central role that schools play. So, you know, just hearing you as key stakeholders in the community and leaders speak to this, I hope educates your fellow residents about a broader view about the important and central role that schools play. And I will also level set, Russ, and say, I am a graduate of Springfield High. Go Spartans, if there's any Spartans on. So this is a strong Monco front here. And with that, to round out this conversation, you know, you have a terrific county commissioner in Ken Lawrence. He has been a education advocate since his days at Temple, when he and I worked together before he ran for office. And he has really shown that being a leader in the county can really change the lives of so many people in the county. So Commissioner Lawrence, we're so happy to have you with us today. And, you know, we really want to get a sense of what you worry about or what you hope for as it relates to solving the school financial crisis and the need to build the spirit of people in the community behind the schools so they have the resources to get through this short-term pandemic. Ken, you're muted. You're muted. Do you see where you unmute? Still can't hear you. Ah. Somebody's calling him. Okay. We still can't hear you. While Ken is figuring out his technology, speak as soon as he can be heard. I would like to know from the superintendents and Laura who are there, you know, people are going to be very concerned if you ask for a property tax increase to deal with the local revenue loss that might be occurring. And what would you advise your Russ and Peggy Lee and even Ken to explain to folks as you have to balance your budget, why that even in this extraordinary historic economic calamity is something that people are going to need to support?
I can take that. I think there's a notion out there that people think that taxpayers think we're saving millions of dollars during the shutdown, which is actually the reverse. So we are in Souderton, potentially our projection is a loss between the shutdown date of March through June 30th, a loss of $1.5 million in local revenue for this current budget year. On top of that, we've had to spend so far about $800,000 in additional expenses to meet the needs of the COVID-19 pandemic and to meet the online needs that we talked about earlier. So I think that's a talking point that's important for taxpayers to understand. And I also know that we have to be respectful of our taxpayers because we have to know what our unemployment rate is locally in our communities. We have to understand all those parameters before we make a solid decision on tax increases.
And I'll add to that too, even just beyond the particular crisis this year, what I've seen as I've looked at our budget is that unless we are going to actually cut programs, we have to raise taxes just to maintain what we have. The costs every year go up, even if we don't really add anything new, you know, just like inflation would be an example. It's like things are always getting more expensive. Even so, just to maintain requires that we somehow raise money. And if that doesn't come from the state, we don't know where else to get it but locally.
Donna, I would really drill it down to probably the simplest denominator, which is any investment in education is an investment in our children. It's an investment in the future. And, you know, whether that's a $1 tax increase, a 2.6, a 3.3, you know, that we're grappling with right now in Norristown, you know, those are dollars spent towards the future of our county, the future of our communities, the future of our country. And to me, I don't think you can quantify that, you know, in terms of taking away opportunities from our children.
And I guess but let me ask you a question, Superintendent Dormer, about that. Some of your residents don't have any kids. So they're like, take away the future from my kids? Like, I already did that. My kids are done. They're grown. What are you going to say?
Well, I mean, when not to get into the total picture of property taxes, but when you look what it costs to educate a child versus what a person's property taxes are, I know, I live down in Delaware County. I have 3 kids going through school. What I pay in property taxes is not even coming close to covering the bill for my own children. So I rely on, other people. And likewise, when my kids are done, my investment of property taxes is going to be somewhat of the repayment for what I got for my children. But ultimately, yeah, I am paying for someone else's children, but I'm paying for the wellness of our community, the wellness of our towns, ultimately the wellness of our Commonwealth and of our country, to make sure that, we have an educated populace. The kids can go on, to become integral cogs of our economy, so that, again, that they're going to continue to reinvest, when you look at what the investment of property taxes are onto what a successful outcome is, it's pennies on the dollar on what's being invested in terms of what we get out of the system.
Well, thank you. Yes, I think it was Senator Warren when she was running for president, and somebody said it before her. You didn't build your company yourself. Somebody built the road there, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. Let us stop for 1 second and see if we can hear Commissioner Lawrence.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can hear me. Okay, great. I don't want to hear about this ever again, Donna, first of all. But sorry, I've been having some technical difficulties here.
I did notice your son come into the room, however.
What?
Your son did come into the room.
Well, because that's my technical assistant.
Exactly.
That's where we go. So it's great to be here this afternoon with 2 of our great superintendents from our Montgomery County school districts. Laura, who was just elected and has been doing great things in the Pottstown School District, and 2 of our great civic leaders in Russ and Peggy, who we work with a lot. So it's really an honor to be here. And of course, I typically do what Donna Cooper asked. That's how I've gotten through life thus far. So it's good to be here to talk about this important topic. We are entering week 12 of the COVID-19 pandemic here in Montgomery County. It was March 7th when we had our first 2 cases. So it's been 12 weeks, and sometimes it feels like longer. And we've learned a lot through this. But one of the most important and probably fundamental things that we've learned is where there were disparities before, whether it was unemployment or hunger or homelessness or healthcare, these disparities have just been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. The demands on our food pantries is through the roof. Our safety net organizations are trying desperately to provide more services. And one of those areas, of course, is the topic of today's conversation, which is education, where we had some school districts that did not miss a beat, really, on this. We have some school districts in Montgomery County where they don't have school days anymore because they have plans in place and they know that all of their students have the technology. So if there was a school day, if there was a snow day, you're still learning from home and you just switch to that. Clearly, we have some school districts who had to face those challenges of making sure that their students had the technology. And one of the things that has been eye-opening for many who didn't know it is how many students in Montgomery County actually depend on their schools for 2 meals a day. And we've seen school districts like Norristown and Pottstown have to quickly figure out not just how to educate their students, but how to feed them as well. And they've done a wonderful job to do that. I had the opportunity to join Norristown for one of their days where families could pick up meals. And it was humbling to see all of the school district personnel that were there and, to see the community come up. But that's also time that they couldn't spend on education. And of course, it's important for our children to eat. But other districts have not faced those challenges. So it's something that we need to look at as we come out of COVID-19. Many school districts and local municipalities have delayed, so we haven't, I don't think, seen quite the financial impact of what that will be. Our economy has faced a lot of job loss, a lot of lost revenue. So it's great that we're going to yellow next week and we're starting the reopening safely and well. But I think we have a long road to go, and I don't think that we're going to see all the impacts of what's happened in the next 3 months and the next 6 months. We certainly want our schools to open in September, but we want them to open in a safe way. I think there's been a greater appreciation for teachers here, for parents who are functionally trying to help and homeschool. So hopefully we can have a greater appreciation of our public education coming out of this, but it shouldn't necessarily be based on the municipality line or the school district line where you live. I have to add that I am a product of the public school system in Montgomery County. I'm a North Penn graduate. My wife went to Wissahickon, and I have 2 sons now, one of who you just saw, who's in the Colonial School District. I think you tend to find that Montgomery County citizens stay here or we come back here. I have a lot of friends from North Penn who are in the North Penn School District or some of the other school districts. So schools are a fabric of our society. They're providing our future employers and employees. We have to make sure that they're funded. We have to make sure that they're funded well. I know we're not talking about this today, but the community college, and Peggy mentioned the community college has faced some of these challenges in finding some of their students who don't have internet accessibility. And I heard you, Donna, and we should work on that. But even at the college level, where I think there was an assumption that everyone must have a computer or everyone must have some internet access, they're finding that as well. So, I'm happy to be a part of this conversation. I want to be an advocate for all the schools in Montgomery County to receive fair funding from Harrisburg, from Washington, D.C., and I hope that everyone on this webinar, if you've heard anything today, it's that we need to fund our schools. And it's not, the level funding isn't going to cut it because there's going to be losses, and we've lost. I know our school districts have done the best that they can during this time. But this time out of school or this online learning, as I said, we're going to have to see what some of the consequences of this are as we get our students back into school and continue. So I will end with that.
Well, thank you. And I will say that for us at PCCY and collectively together in Montgomery County, the sentiment on this 1-hour conversation really speaks to an extraordinary amount of support for public education. And I think, by the time you get to Harrisburg, some of that sentiment seems to have waned. And by the time you get to Washington, some of that sentiment has waned. And they are the 2 places that can really need to step to the plate and can step to the plate to ensure that our schools start next year, not the same as they were this year, but better. Prepared to deal with COVID, prepared to offer a quality education, prepared to support their staff who've had extraordinary stresses put on them, and most important, prepared to deal with the trauma and the anxiety that students will have as they start the next year, their next grade, feeling unprepared. Will I be ready for 3rd grade? Will I be ready for 8th grade? Will I be ready for 11th grade? And how do my little brothers and sisters fit into this picture? So we have a lot on our shoulders, but one of the things I take away from this is the extraordinary support for public education. And I think that we at PCCY, I think just today makes me think about how infrequently we talk across sector about how essential the role that schools play. And what I'm thinking is that between now and September, we in Montgomery County need to find a way to express the unity of support of the essential role that our schools play in the raising of our community and readying our community to grow and take advantage of jobs and retain employers. That essential role, that role that we play in solving trauma and the role that we play in feeding children, the myriad of roles that schools play, we need to speak to that with one voice so that both of our Pennsylvania senators, our entire congressional delegation, and the entire Montgomery County House and Senate delegation in Harrisburg knows you have their back when they take those votes that put more money on the table for schools and remove the kinds of barriers and inefficiencies that Superintendent Gallagher spoke to so eloquently, things that tie our hands, that undermine the ability of the school districts to deliver. So I want to thank the commissioner for being here. I want to thank Peggy Lee-Clark from the Industrial Development Authority being part of this conversation. Russ Johnson from HealthSpark Foundation being part of this conversation. You've enriched this and inspired me. And I get to talk with the superintendents and school board members, and I'm so excited that they're here today. And I hope that this conversation gives us all energy to continue to build supporters and stakeholders and grow our circle of support around our schools so that they can start the next year with all the support they need so our children thrive. So on behalf of PCCY, call your state legislator, tell them not to freeze property taxes, call your US senators, tell them the schools need more money, because otherwise we are in for a scary situation in September. Thank you.
Charter school reform, Donna, charter school reform.
And yes, and join us and learn. We should say one sentence. LEARN is a group of superintendents that are working together for charter school reform, and PCCY is a partner. We're like the parent citizen side of that. So if you want to know more about what Superintendent Gallagher said, Tamia Scipio-Smith is on this call, Shirley House on this call. There's lots of folks from the School Boards Association on this call, as is Laura. We're all eager to talk with you about the fact that if we can reform how our charter schools work, so they teach kids well and we use money more economically, we will also be able to put more money back into our schools for the kids that go to those buildings. And that's the bedrock of the public education system in Montgomery County, the children going to the bricks and mortar schools operated by your great school districts. Thank you for being with us today, and keep up the fight. Bye-bye, folks.